Hello everyone, I'm Forrest McFreelava, and this is Mayan Speedplay number 28. We left off in a war against the First Coalition, as well as against the British and their empire. We go ahead and still have an army in Southeast Asia, which we're going to use to just drop on this French fortress island. Hopefully we will be able to take at least a significant number of major French and other nations' main bases over in the Southeast Asian area once this war is done, which is still probably quite some time away. We're also going to bring some forces over against some of their other islands. And generally, this is going to be more or less an island-hopping campaign for the next decent amount of time. Just because we really probably can't fight in France. We probably can't fight in the Ottoman Empire, in Anatolia, or in Greece. But we can take all of their colonial territories pretty much without worry of being attacked or anything along those lines. We're taking Hawaii right now, and really as long as we get Hawaii and the bit of Alaska that the Ottomans control, I'll be pretty happy with that. But I do want to take more of their islands just to limit the amount of influence they can carry out in Southeast Asia and all of those various areas. Although admittedly the AI isn't really limited by naval limitations as human players are, so it isn't maybe the best thing to do, although I don't want to deal with the islands over and over again as the coalitions probably reform. We could also limit Brazil just to their coast, but I don't think that's quite likely, and there are still quite a few islands just about, which I would be more comfortable with them being in our control. That all being said, we are still winning more or less navally, although they do have significant forces, so we are being pretty cautious with our naval elements. We do get a new king, who is 333, and a new heir, who is 444. However, our heir is something like 3 years old, so we've got to make this new king last for about 12 years. And then once that's done, hopefully have him be a general and just kind of take care of what needs to be taken care of and hopefully die and get replaced by his heir. That all being said, we managed to narrowly avoid a British fleet with our transports. We have our battle fleet coming up, a whole bunch of two-deckers, about 40 of which. We do manage to intercept the Ottomans. They just retreat. It looks as though the British are coming and we won't be able to avoid this battle. They have something like 100 ships to our 40. However, we have considerably more large ships than they do, and we are just pounding theirs to pieces. They have so many transports involved. Speaking of transports, we start transporting troops to various areas since the enemy navies have been so occupied. We're going to pull back and reinforce and repair our ships a bit. It looks as though a French colonial nation, so Australia, is attempting to attack our transports, which they'll probably do successfully, as terrible as that is. So we detach a few transports to ship over to reinforce what losses we're probably going to take. Evacuate those guys. We do lose a transport, so it was a prudent move. And we do go ahead and detach and send over an extra transport. Alright, that all said and done, Alright, so we're not winning the war against the British, but we are winning the war against everyone else. Luckily, the war, despite its duration and just sheer number of fronts, hasn't really been that hard fought of a thing, to be completely honest. Sure, we just lost a transport over here in the Indian Ocean, but that's not really the biggest deal. We are sending our battle fleet over to just deal with the French colonial nation, Terra Austriale or something along those lines. There we go. Terra Austrae. And we're going to just land on them and hopefully take a decent portion of their coastline from them. Ultimately, though, we are probably just going to try to take some islands, just because those are the most those are the most tedious things that we've been trying to grab so far. And as long as we're able to just rush on in, take a decent number of them, make peace, we'll then be able to fight the British Empire and get a 100% war score from them directly. Now, the main thing that we're going to want to do is hopefully we'll knock the Ottomans out just to the extent that we don't actually care about fighting them anymore. Hopefully take Brunei's capital, and if we're lucky, win this battle against Terra Austriale, which will determine whether or not we actually stay in this war or not. If we lose the battle, it'll be too negative, but it looks as though we're going to win it very handedly, so we're going to try to take a decent amount of Terra Austriale. We are carrying our forces up against the English, who have landed in North America and are being just a bit of a problem here. They're very close to finishing that siege, and we are still dropping forces just on various islands in the Pacific and it looks as though we somehow, through some crazy amount of luck, managed to intercept them before they finished their siege and destroy that army. So that is pretty great news. We've also taken all of their South African areas. We're just going to rush these troops back over to Brazil to deal with the rebels there. Eventually we'll have to send some troops over to Africa to deal with the British peasants rising up there. Although that's more or less, we're taking a coalition first attitude towards this war, in the sense that we're just going to be fighting them first while we kind of just hope Britain will leave us alone, more or less, and eventually deal with them once the opportunity arises. We managed to finish our siege in Terra Austriale, and we're taking all sorts of islands in the Indian Ocean. At this point, we're not getting very much in the way of additional war score. However, the most important thing, first of all, is that we don't lose that battle, but second of all is that we can't actually demand provinces that we do not have control over, which means we can't even see what sort of peace deals we can afford until we actually have troops on the provinces to actually check if we can afford them. It's kind of a bittersweet thing in the sense that it's not really that much of a fight to take these territories, but we also don't know how much war score there'll be, or really anything along those lines. So we're just jumping through, grabbing what we can so we can actually ask for them in the peace deals. We also can't offer peace with anyone except for Brazil, the war leader, since it is a coalition war. Which just kind of makes this whole thing a little tedious, and if we were actually on the same continent as any of them, other than Brazil, obviously, then it would be just a terrible, terrible slog for not very much. Luckily for us, though, the British declared a separate war, so we're really going to just demolish what we can of the British Empire in this peace deal once we eventually get it. And more or less just keep taking all these islands so we can see how much they would cost to request in a peace deal. Now, we're not actually going to take the fight towards the actual territories of really the coalition members other than Brazil, since they have considerably large armies, and ours are all spread out dealing with basically everything that isn't quite a fire, but just kind of dealing with situations as they're rising up throughout the world. For instance, we do have a considerable amount of our forces in Brazil actively fighting there right now, or just actively taking territories back. We destroyed an Ottoman army, for example, on our continent. We also just lost to this British army. Now, part of the reason we're not going to send forces into the coalition's territories is because of, one, how poorly the Ottoman army did against us. Kind of represents what I'm worried about, that we would land on their continent and just get overwhelmed by local defenses. Another thing is that the British are fighting us kind of actively and thus are a threat. We are also in Australia, which is distant enough that we can probably win. We lost another battle against the British. Hopefully we can bring our forces to the coast and avoid a third, as I really don't want to lose any of our armies, and those setbacks are considerable enough. So the British are definitely making themselves an apparent threat, which is considerable and very worrying. Luckily, we are just about at the point where we have all of our war goals against the coalition basically captured. We're just going to keep roving up the coast of Australia and taking the remainder of these islands, and then we'll probably be looking to make peace. Now, one of the main concerns is we haven't really been able to keep our army as mobile as I've been wanting, simply because there are just so many foreign navies in the seas that could potentially intercept us, and I don't want to lose the men. So we're playing this very conservatively. You'll notice we only have one theater, and that's the Indian Ocean, where we have significant numbers of troops and materiel in use. In the South Pacific, where you just saw, we do have troops, but they are just single stacks of troops being ferried around by single stacks of transports. So we're arguably really overdoing the invasions in the Indian Ocean, although those are just the units we had available. And it maintains their cohesion for later on when we want to group them back up and fight the British with them, which is almost certainly what will end up happening. So with that in mind, we do keep battling Terra Austriale, as well as trying to just deal with various events in the British invasion. What we're going to do now is just split our force up, charge straight on along, and hopefully just stack wipe that remaining force. From there, hopefully we will be in a position to make peace. There are revolts all throughout Tunis, but it looks as though they somehow have an army again. Hopefully the Ottomans will deal with that before we make peace. And we're going to pull our Brazilian forces up here to New Orleans area. Hopefully we'll be able to do that decently well. We're also taking over the final islands and final bits of Australia that we need or want. So once we have all of that under our control, we'll be able to move forward. We also get attacked by a Terra Austriale navy, which we managed to defeat with only minimal losses. Alright, so there we go. We are almost done with the war against the First Coalition. It has been not so much a slog, so much as just a lot going on. We also managed to narrowly avoid that British army before it became a huge problem. And yes, once this siege ticks over, we're probably going to go ahead and try to make peace. Also, Austria just declared war on France, which admittedly is kind of nice for us, although none of the French armies have actually showed up anywhere, so it isn't too terribly relevant. We also go ahead and see what sort of peace deal we can get, just grabbing all sorts of provinces. It looks like that throws it over the edge, which is a little unfortunate. Ideally, we'll take at least most of their Pacific islands. We'll probably have to turn them all up to 100% autonomy anyway, so that's not really the greatest. Looks like Terra Austriale's provinces are decently cheap. So we're just going to go ahead and grab the coast and just a few islands throughout. We're not going to grab anything from Brazil proper since it's just very expensive, and we'll probably just declare war on them the day the truce ends. A separate war where, they won't have a coalition to call upon. We're probably also going to do that in order to fight Terra Austriale. And the Ottomans don't really bother me all that much, but hopefully, if we're lucky, we'll be able to get Tunis into a position where they'll be capable of fighting a fight against the Ottomans with our support. We also land 2 armies, 64,000 men here. We managed to just force march around the British and cause them to attack us, which is pretty spectacular since their army is probably somewhat superior to ours in at least 1 or 2 respects. However, we have more troops than they do, and we're just doing pretty decent. So, all told, we're going to hopefully go ahead and pluck up our remaining armies, and all the areas that will more likely than not revolt are areas that we can probably just increase the autonomy of and delay any sort of revolution attempt or whatever. So we're going to just carry our forces over, get rid of the remaining British in North America, and then hopefully take the war to their home islands for the 2nd time. So we go ahead, smash right on into that British army. We did not stack wipe it, but they can only go to so many places, and it looks like they're going to that colony they have occupied from us. So we're going to just race them there. We've stack wiped their main force. Hopefully that is a considerable portion of their army. They do have a relatively weaker empire than they did in the last war that we fought against them. So I can't imagine they have very much in the way of a strategic reserve. We do also carry our transports up. Now we have more or less free roaming with our navies, really. So we can just bring our forces wherever they need to go. There's 1 British army left up here in northernmost America. We're going to go ahead and just drop this army, put a decent general in charge, and rush on in. If it doesn't look like they're doing well, we'll just reinforce them with another group. We're also going to take British Australia. We can probably take the whole thing, and hopefully just all of their colonies once again. And it looks like we just stack wiped that army without even having to bring reinforcements to bear, so we're going to carry all of these troops over to the British home islands, and just like they roved across North America, we will rove across their homelands and see what we can do to them. So the only pit that really worries us now is the crossing of the Atlantic. There are some British ships which could intercept our transports for a moment, although our battle fleet is involved in this as well. So we're going to drop 1 army in Tyrone, another army in Ulster, and then a 3rd army will also just reinforce in Ulster. Now the British war goal is to retake Ulster, so that's a pretty good place to start, and it also keeps them divided from one island to the other. At any rate though, this has been quite a long episode. We're finally at a point where the British Empire is once again being torn from the sun, so thank you very much for watching.